What is up, everybody? My name is Blob, and welcome to my tips and tricks walkthrough for foliage and terrain work in Planet Zoo. Before we jump into things, I'm just going to jump in and go through a few disclaimers before we start. So here we are. Nobody wants me to go through this, but I'm going to go through it for the purposes of clarification with everyone. First of all, this is not a tutorial. Everything here is my personal preference on approach to terrain and foliage work in Planet Zoo. As stated before, there are loads of videos on how other creators approach this, and each video is as valid as the last, and I highly recommend that you go and watch those videos in order to find your personal preference, style and approach to this as well. As I've said before as well, foliage is like handwriting. If I ask 100 people to write out the word path, everyone will write in different styles, fonts and even languages, but in the end nobody will be incorrect in how they approach this. So for that reason, please bear in mind that everything that you see in today's video is all subjective and what personally works for me. At the end of the day, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And most importantly, I'll be attempting to keep everything tailored toward both PC and the future console players for the purpose of this video. But with that being said, at the time of recording and making this video, not all the foliage that you potentially see in this video will be options that are available to console players from the get-go because of how they'll be releasing DLC in the game. But with all that out of the way, let us begin. So, hi everybody, my name is Rob and we're going to be starting with this template, what you see before you here. Nothing too fancy, literally just a curved path, and we're going to be doing a little bit of terrain work to begin with. I was originally just going to do a foliage tips, but then I thought to myself, I think terrain work plays a lot of work in how your foliage ends up looking as well. So this is what we're going to be using in front of you. I understand a lot of people at the start of the game are obviously going to be using grids as well because it's the most efficient way of laying out a zoo. Everything that you see here is going to be 100% applicable to that as well, however you want to lay things out. But I would obviously highly encourage you to sort of deviate away from the straight paths and start using a few curves and height variations as well. And you can see here that I have added a sand portion. I've used the terrain paint just to paint in this small area. This is going to be a body of water, but again, we'll be challenging that a little bit later on. I just want to sort of cover as much as I can in this video. But I'm just going to be going through and painting out the paths using the terrain as well. This isn't a necessary step. This is just something I have done because in this video I'm going to be deleting paths and relaying them because you cannot edit terrain while paths are down. You can if you have the free build mod, but again, I want this to be tailored toward console players as well, and that isn't something that's going to be available to them. So this is me laying out where the paths originally were so that I can lay them back to where they, as close to their original position as I can, really. I'm going to be starting off by deleting the paths. Again, I can't do any of my terrain adjustments that I want to do while the paths are here, so just going to delete them, and you can see there the terrain paint sort of perfectly represents where the paths originally were. But I'm going to be using the terrain stamp to begin with. The first thing I'm going to be including here is a ramp, and I really think this is a nice way of getting some height variation in your zoos. Flat zoos are something, again, you're going to be sort of starting off with, no doubt. But over time, you'll want to start introducing some height variations. And I really think that these terrain stamps are a really key way of doing that. You can see I've just placed the highest point. I think it's always easier to work from your highest point and then start working your way down. And how are we going to be doing that, I hear you ask? Well, I've covered this a very long time ago at the start of my pause series, but you can see me doing it here. The two really key things when you're, I think, doing an incline is, again, start from the top and work your way down to ground level. And the two main things you're going to be paying attention to when you do this are going to be your intensity and your size of your brush, located down here. And if we just freeze it here for a second, you can see that we've got these set down to really low settings. Intensity at 30%, size down at 4, and this combination will work beautifully for you. Those of you who play on PC will know that sometimes getting the size specifically that you want, like 3, is a little bit annoying because it will flick between 2 and 4. But 4, for the purposes of this, work perfectly fine. But you can see as we work our way down, the way that we're doing this is we're literally just tapping. We're not holding it, we are just tapping as we go down and moving the cursor ever so slightly so that we are getting this incline that we want. So And just make sure you're checking this. Always check what you're doing. So you'll see I'm panning the camera down and getting like a profile view to see if I can get it looking exactly how I want. Then using the smooth tool, don't change the settings, keep them at the intensity and size just so that you don't have to keep swapping and changing your tool sizes. And then, yeah, just keep checking. Please keep checking these. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to be extending the terrain out a little bit. There's going to be foliage here, but another tool that is really useful and shouldn't be slept on is this align to surface tool. Especially if you're extending out these ramps. Once you've made your perfect incline ramp that you're happy with, then you can use this tool just to extend it out and make it a little bit wider if needed, so there isn't a sheer drop on either side. And then after some smoothing, we are going to extend the top of the hill out just a little bit, just so that the path has somewhere to go, because it will look a little bit odd if, for the purposes of this, it just ends. So we're going to extend it a little bit. Again, however your pathing layout is going to be, this is going to be absolutely fine. I just wanted to extend this out a little bit as if it was going to wrap around the back of the pond as well. And we're going to be jumping onto that in a minute. But like I say, please don't adjust any of your settings for the purposes of consistency and making sure that you're not making mistakes. Keep these as uniform as you possibly can. And now jumping on to the pond. I've always found that the easiest way of doing this is to dig out the middle and then use the flatten tool just to dig out the size that you want. Don't worry if you go too deep to begin with. You can always adjust this and then just re-go over the whole area with the flatten tool. But the whole reason why I will end up doing the deepest point first is because sometimes I don't feel like I've got the desired look. And I think, again, working from your highest or your lowest point really is always the best way to go, instead of just sort of eyeballing it as you go. And then just to get a smooth edge around the pond, I'm just going to be using the smooth tool, and then I'm going to use the flatten to foundation tool, and using the same premise as when you're doing a steep incline, just tap as you move it around the edge of the pond here. You can see I'm just moving it around and just clicking and getting rid of all these sharper edges, just so that it's a bit more of a shallow incline and you slide into the water rather than just a sheer drop into the water. And then again, I will go over this with the smooth tool. But I always feel like your best results in terms of smoothing are going to be by using the flatten to foundation tool to begin with. And again, just clicking, click, 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 click. You can get an idea of how much I'm clicking by, at the bottom there, you've got the undo and redo buttons. You see how it's like flickering? That just sort of gives you an idea of just how often I'm clicking here. And on console, this is probably going to be no different. You're just going to be sort of spamming whatever button it's going to be to apply these terrain adjustments. And then, yeah, I'm just going through and holding with the smooth tool just to get rid of any finer little jagged edges that I can't quite see, but the game is able to pick up on. And then I'm going to be applying my water. Unfortunately, water in this game can be literally a pain in the derriere to work with. But on this occasion, because I'm working at the flat default level, it means that my water will go in just fine. But when you place water in this game, you can only place it in increments. You can't set a level and fill it to that level. It will only go in increments. So if you are going to be working with water, maybe look for your water increment first before doing any of this terrain work, just to save yourself some hassle. And then we're going to start placing our paths back in. Again, you can see where I've placed the terrain paint, the mud terrain paint in the beginning. It allows me to place my paths pretty much where they were from the get-go, as close as possible. They're not obviously exact, but it's going to be about as exact as I can get it. I use the chip wood here to begin with, but then I end up changing it to the grey tarmac because it's just a little bit easier to see the incline. And I go down here again, this is what I'm talking about. Go down and check your inclines. This incline is pretty damn smooth. You don't want any ridiculously high inclines, because at the end of the day it doesn't really look that realistic and it's going to look a little bit awkward as well. But I'm going to go through and replace the path as well. Again, I just want you to be able to see this a little bit easier. And then I'm going to go through and give you a little bit of a tip that I've covered a little bit before, again, in previous videos. But for the sake of covering it in the video that it's meant to be in, I'm going to be showing you a way to get nice curves on your paths as well. So at the bottom of the hill, we have got a T-junction. And I'm going to be showing you a way to sort of make those curves a little bit smoother. So the way of doing this is so simple. You literally just get your pathing tool and you place it at a 45-degree angle to the right angle, and then just delete the path again. Simply as you see there, and you end up with this nice little rounded T rather than a harsh T shape. And you can see this is already looking a lot nicer than if you'd have had the harsh T shape there. It just helps when you're walking into an area like this. It helps open the space out a lot more when you have that opened up funnel rather than, again, a harsh corner. And then at the top of the hill here, I'm just going to be adding in a little bit of pathing just so that it's got somewhere to sort of go at the top of this hill. I'm not going to be doing anything with this. It's just for the purposes of filling out the top of the hill area with something. And that's where we're at so far. And here we are onto the Rockwork portion. I'd always highly encourage you to do your Rockwork before any type of foliage in this game. And the simple fact of the matter is you can then use the gaps within the Rockwork to work out where you're going to be placing your foliage. But you can see here in the background we have this is a blueprint item. I don't often use blueprints from the workshop, but you can also get hold of the color codes for what is the item in the background here, which is the faux rock pieces. These are so good, and I cannot recommend them enough. Obviously, from the get-go, I'm not sure if this is an item that will be available to console players, but I can see someone making it really quickly when it is available. So when it's available, don't feel bad about using this item. It's such a lifesaver instead of having the item like color codes to hand whenever you need them. And for the purposes of this video, we're going to be deleting all of them apart from the temperate and the tiger ones. So let's jump and do that now, shall we? So here I've deleted all of them apart from the temperate and the tiger variations. Now, obviously, they're the only two that I'm going to be using for the purposes of this, but if you're obviously building in a desert setting, then you would delete all of them apart from, say, the desert one. Or if you were building in, say, a tropical setting, you would keep the tropical ones and the mossy ones. Again, there is no right or wrong answer for this. And this area of the video is going to be sped up just a little bit because of the monotony of what is going on in the background here. But I'm still going to be explaining the method of what is going on just for clarity and to help you guys understand what I'm doing here. What I'm going through and doing is taking these faux rock piles and basically placing them down in different layers and sections. So the first one here that I'm using is the temperate larger one, and just going through and placing it on the surface. I've grouped them all together as well. That is a really important thing. Make sure that you group these items together but separate them from the main group that you got them from. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm putting them all on the surface now, and they're going to look a little bit ridiculous. But a little bit later on, we're going to be sinking them into the ground so that just sort of the top portion of each of these is showing. And then I go over and grab the other variant. I grabbed the same one by mistake, but I soon realized my mistake. But it would be the same thing again. It's worth noting that there is absolutely no method to where I'm placing these and how I'm placing these. The only thing that's important at this stage is that I'm placing them in a group on the surface so that I can then sink them down later on. So for this reason, the two really important settings that you want to have enabled at all times when you're doing this is align to surface and random rotation. Not random rotation all. What random rotation always going to be doing is it's going to be flipping it as well as just rotating it. We want it just rotating on its current axis. But obviously, if you flip it, you're going to end up with something that is going to look pretty horrendous because the underside texture of these rocks is not very good, because that's obviously not what they're meant for. But once we're done, we're going to go through and we are going to select all of the smaller rocks as well, the smaller rock piles. Again, exact same premise. Separating them from groups, placing them along the surface as well. And then at the end, we're going to sink everything down. You see me do it with the big rocks here, and you see how it makes quite a large difference to how it looks. But we're going to do it with the smaller one as well and go through and do that. But this is going to be a bit more methodical. I'm keeping these closer to the large rock groups. But the one thing that you do not want to do, and you saw me just do it there, is you don't want to accidentally add it to the large rock groups, because what will happen is that when you then try and lower this, you're going to lower the big rock groups even more, and they might disappear altogether. a way of telling that you're about to add something to a group is when you hover, just as you're about to place the item, if you hover it near, it will come up with a little window, white window, next to the item saying add to group, and then it will have a group number. You obviously don't want that to happen, so make sure that you're avoiding that at all costs. And then I swap and go back over to the tiger rock as well and add that. The reason I'm using two different types of rocks here is because it adds a little bit of variation. You can use the same rock. Again, like I said at the very start of this video, it's not an incorrect way of doing it and it's not a correct way of doing it. It's just that for the purposes of this, I'm going to be using multiple rocks just to show you that you can mix the rock types and it isn't a taboo thing. And then we sink all those into the ground as well once they're done. And this means that we can then move on to the bigger, bulkier rock. So jumping into the nature tab and just typing in the rock that we're looking for. So because we're looking for temperate, I can type in temp and it will filter that down to the temperate rocks. And then I just start placing these along this ridge here. And the reason is because it just helps hide this little mini, it's not a cliff really, it's too not that steep to call it a cliff, but it helps you hide the edge where it's going to come down to the water. But then you can also scatter it amongst all the other existing rocks as well. You don't really want to go too ham on these, but again, it depends what you're building for. What I'm going to be building in the background here is going to be sort of a small foresty wooded area, and you wouldn't really find that many just random rocks sticking up from the ground. Obviously, against the path here is an exception to the rule because it's more of a cliff face and it would be subject to erosion. But again, you wouldn't really find too much in terms of just big massive boulders sticking out the ground in a biome like this. Obviously, if you're building something a bit more mountainous or something with a bit higher altitude, then you would absolutely see a lot more rocks appearing and maybe even sticking out of the ground. But now that we're done with those, we're going to go through and type in tiger so that we get our tiger rocks as well. You can see what I mean when I'm working in layers. So it's all one type of rock, then I'll go to another type of rock, and then I'll go to another type of rock, and then keep going through the different types that I'm going to be working with. I think the reason I do this in my head is because it allows me to evenly distribute the different types of rock evenly. If I kept flicking between them, first of all, you're wasting a lot of time by changing your filters, but also you can sort of evenly disperse them out so it looks a bit more natural really. But I use the term a bit more natural with a massive grain of salt because it's worth noting that these things don't have natural ways of forming there is no correct way of placing rocks at the end of the day. You know, these things will erode in not random patterns, but you know, you can't 100% say for sure that you have a solid rock and you can say 100 years down the line that this is what that rock is going to look like, because there's going to be so many factors that come into play when it comes to how your rocks look and end up looking. This long rock that you see me using here is pretty much one of the most slept on rocks as well, in my opinion. I really love how it looks, especially when you're building, when you've got a gap as well on an incline. So obviously you see along the water's edge, we had a bit of a gap. And because of the incline of the path fits with the incline of the rock, it means you can cover a really nice area using this rock. And that has some really nice textures as well. But really utilize all of these. But that's going to be it for the rock work. Let's jump on into the foliage. Now I'm about to show you a series of images, and all of these images have one thing in common, and that is that they have all been made using the method I'm about to explain to you right now. They're all across different biomes, across different continent sets, but the method itself works across any type of foliage that you're working with in the game, and you can see it all in the background here, and it's something that I've been using for pretty much the last sort of couple of years or so, and it has not failed me at all. So I'm hoping it will work for you guys as well, but I'm going to cover that now. Let's jump on in and have a look at that. So here is a few of the method points that I'm going through across the whole thing, And it's generally a rule of thumb that is applicable to most foliage types. Obviously, there's going to be some variation here and there depending on what biome and stuff you're working with. But yeah, these are the rules that I work with when I'm doing foliage. So I tend to aim for around about 2 to 3 types of tree, as well as 3 ground coverages. So this is things like buffalo grasses, drin grasses, and such like thing. And then 3 to 4 types of bushes as well. And by bushes, I mean sort of your medium-sized foliage. So not tall sprawling trees, but not something that lays low on the ground like grasses and periwinkle leaves. Keeping a line to surface on when placing as well for ground cover. Random rotation on at all times as well. But just be aware that in some biomes that this method can be quite piece-heavy, especially in things like temperate foresty biomes. And here's just a bit of an example for you to see. So at the top here, we've got ash and beech trees. They're my 2 tree types that I've got in here. And then we've got the dog rose bushes, custard trees, foxgloves, and that sort of thing as my sort of medium bushy type things. And then a combination of dry and normal buffalo grass on the ground. It's such a small palette that I work with, but I really think the results could be quite powerful when you're keeping things to a minimum. Less really is more in some circumstances. But here's going to be the live example, and the first thing I'll always do is go through and set my biome and my continent types. Here you can see me using Tiger Temperate and what is that, Europe. And yeah, so I start off going through the list of foliage. I really encourage you to not just play off of what other people are using as their foliage. I really do encourage you to go through and pick foliage that you like the idea of and you like the look of. Again, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. You might not like the look of these trees, but I do. So it is subjective, and it is something I highly encourage you to do, to go through and review it for yourself. So you see I'm picking these trees here, and I know you're saying to yourself instantly, hang on, you've got 6 trees there. You said stick to 2 to 3. When I say 2 to 3 types, I mean, so the 3 trees that I'm looking at here are your cork trees, but they have 3 different variations. So you've got cork tree 1, cork tree 2, and cork tree 3. Even though they're 3 different trees, I consider them one types, and that is what I'm going off of here. Types, not specific trees, because you really don't want the same size tree everywhere, because it just makes everything look a bit too uniform at the end of the day. So you really want to try and avoid sticking to just one height of tree. And another thing to be very wary of when you're picking your foliage is try and get some variation in here. So these trees that I've got at the back here are quite bushy, whereas the ash trees on the left here are quite spindly and the sunlight shines through them a bit more. And then you've obviously got the cork trees at the front, which are, they're a different variation of green, as well as having a different variation of trunk style as well. You really want to create variations instead of picking things that all match the same. I'm then moving on to my bushes, or my medium-sized foliage, if you will. And I tend to go with things like saltworts are quite a big one. At the moment, my absolute favourite, if you've been watching the Pause series, is creosote bushes. They don't fit the biome type, so I'm just going to go through and delete these. You don't feel like you have to stick to the biome and continent filters that you pick. You really can deviate away from this. This just gives you an idea. If you're building for a habitat, obviously certain animals require certain types of foliage from biomes or continents. And while on the topic of habitats, obviously if you are building a habitat and you are using foliage, something you really kind of want to be semi-wary of is plants that are not traversable. Sparrow 838 made an absolutely insane video and even a spreadsheet to accommodate this, to show you which plants are traversable and not traversable. I'm going to put a link to the video and the spreadsheet down below. It's absolutely a really, really useful resource if you are starting out with the game. And yeah, it helps you get adjusted to these sorts of things, because you don't want to build a habitat that is perfectly sized and then start placing down saltworts only to find that they're eating up your traversable area and therefore making your animals unhappy. Really, really good. Check it out. Please do. It's such a good tool. But we're going to start going through and adding our foliage now. And same premise as when we're doing our rocks. We're going to go through and work in layers. First thing I'm going to do is place down the trees. I'm going to start with these large beech trees to begin with, and then we'll start going through the smaller size ones and then move on to a different type of tree. Something that I really encourage you to do when you're placing trees as well is that don't be afraid to tilt them a little bit as well, just for a little bit of variation. Again, even though you're using the same tree, you can create variation by rotating them and also by tilting them. We're going to be using these beech trees a little bit later on as well for a different purpose, but I'll cover that when we get to it in the video behind us here. But yeah, that's my first group of trees done already. It really is simple. There is no methodology to it. The only thing that you really want to be wary of is that you're not clipping. Obviously, the larger beech trees have got quite a low tree line. I don't know if that's the correct term or word for it, but the branches hang quite low, so just be wary that you're not clipping them inside buildings or anything like that if you are placing these adjacent to buildings. Then we move on to the ash trees. Ash trees, I think ash trees might be one of my favorites, to be honest with you. They're such a nice shape. The branches aren't the density of the foliage is quite nice as well. It hits that nice sweet spot, and it lets you get little glimpses of stuff between the tree line as well, which is really nice. Only going to place a few of them, but before moving on to these cork trees as well. And you'll see me just tilting these trees in the background as well. Please don't be afraid to do this. Something as well that is kind of slept upon, I feel like, is you may think to yourself, this is quite a lot of trees, you know, at the end of the day. But something to bear in mind is that when zoos and theme parks and such like are building, especially larger open plaza areas, something that they need to take into account is shading, especially if you're in a warmer temperate climate where the weather can be very, very warm and humid. Shade really is important for guest welfare as well as animal welfare if they're perhaps not suited to that climate per se. So don't feel like you're going a bit too overboard with trees, because sometimes it may be necessary depending on the area that you're working with. Just a moment ago there, you would have seen me sink the beech trees into the ground as well as sort of like a makeshift bush. And then what I'm basically going to be doing is using these creosote bushes to go around and blend the beech trees that I've just sunk into the ground to the ground level as well. Again, I absolutely love these creosote bushes. The texture on them is absolutely amazing. The second variation as well with the yellow like speckles in it as well. Incredible. Absolutely love them. So at the moment, again, if you've been watching Pause, you'll know that I'm pretty sure 50% of the piece count in that whole place right now is consistent of creosote bushes and buffalo grass. But it's not a bad thing because, again, like I say, I love them and I'll continue to use them. But the main thing to take away from this is that everything here has a purpose. The trees are here to provide shade as well as different variations of greens and colours. The creosote bushes that I'm placing here are to blend your rockwork to your ground level, as well as the beech trees at the back into the ground level as well, because you can get these gaps appearing. So this is more of a blending type of foliage. Even though it looks amazing at the same time, I'm using it to blend elements together. The trees, blend those into the ground as well, blend the rocks into the ground as well, and just bring everything together, because when I start placing the buffalo grass, that is going to be sitting in between each of these creosote patches as well as I've sunk them into the ground. And it might seem like I'm going really fast when I'm placing this foliage, but this is something that comes over time. But that being said, don't spend too much time thinking about exact placement of your foliage. Obviously, trees are something you might put a little bit more thought into. If you've got sight lines, you don't want trees blocking those sight lines or bushes blocking those sight lines. So in elements and instances such as those, you might sort of rethink it and just go, this isn't right here, I'm going to change it, which is absolutely fine. A lot of this is going to be trial and error. Again, this isn't a tutorial, this is a tips video. This is how I personally do this and take this challenge on. And then we are going to move on to the custard trees. The custard trees are a bit of a double-edged sword for me. I really like them. I think they are a nice variation of green. Obviously, the creosote bushes have got sort of like a paley, more grey kind of green to them, whereas these are a more bright green, a more foliage green, if you will. It's difficult to put it into words, but yeah, again, it's a different colour, it's a different variation. It just stops the creosote bushes from just being too overpowering. That's their purpose. Again, everything here has a purpose. And then we go through and then we place these speckled creosote bushes in. They help blend the custard trees with the normal creosote bushes, but they also add a pop of color. The yellow really is a nice color to use when you're trying to create pops of color. It's quite a common color as well. Obviously, later on, we'll be looking at the ground foliage, and buttercups are an option that are definitely available to you as a ground coverage, as well as things like poppies, the daisies as well are nice for a little pop of white. Blue stems are nice for a pop of purple. But we're going to use goldenrods later on as well, which I used to sleep on. I used to think that they were kind of ugly, but over time I found that there is a way that you can place them that makes them look really kind of nice. But I will show you that a little bit later on as per. But yeah, after all said and done with these creosote bushes, really liking how it looks before moving on to the saltworts. The reason that these are in is because, again, texture. They're more pointed, they have a different color to what is already in. Again, I'm a little bit colorblind, so I struggle to tell the exact differences in the color, but I can see that there is a texture difference in these because they're more like they're like an afro. I've always described these as like an afro type of tree because of how they stick out from a center point. And yeah, I really like them. They're really cool. But again, please bear in mind that these do cut your traversable area. So if this was a habitat, this would be stopping animals from getting to certain sections. So again, check out that video from Sparrow and her spreadsheet. It's an incredible resource. And now we're moving on to the buffalo grass. Easily my favorite piece of foliage in Planet Zoo, hands down by a country mile. But I'm not going to be showing you me placing all of this. The general thing is I'm just going to be trying to cover as much space as I possibly can, but try not to get too close to the paths, and there's a reason for that, and I'll show you that after we've placed all this bulk amount of foliage. But I'm just going through here. Any gaps where the align to surface finds a spot to place the foliage down flat, I'm placing it. But again, don't worry about this if you're placing it as part of a group. That's not such a big deal with this because you're not going to be sinking these down into the ground. The ones close to the edge of the path is where we're going to be sinking it down. But that's a cut and everything has been placed in. You can see I've placed the buffalo grass pretty much everywhere. Again, don't feel like once you've done a layer, you can't go back and adjust the layer. Absolutely plausible, and you can do that. And then we're going to go and add the green grass as our second piece of ground coverage. Again, you can probably tell why I've picked this. It's a different texture, it's a different color. You know, you've got the white tips showing through on the drin grass, and it's a little bit of a different, it's a little bit taller grass as well. It's a bit like what we have in the UK called, I think it's called like crabgrass or something, where you have these weird, darker, taller patches of grass amongst a normal flat green lawn. And after this, we're going to add a little bit of variation. And our next piece of ground coverage is going to be some poppies. Poppies are a bit of a strange one because I would technically consider them part of the buffalo grass because for the most part, they are going to be the same texture. The only thing that you're adding here with poppies is a pop of color and a flash of color. So here I'm using some Yorkshire grass. I count the grasses as just one type of foliage, even though they're technically different. They're the only exception to the rule when it comes to things like this. But there you can see me adding some poppies in just for some different pops of color. Really helps attract the eye to different elements of what you're doing. When you've got especially when you're taking a screenshot, you don't want it to all just seem like one flat image. When you're adding these variations in, you end up with some really nice eye-popping moments. And I was talking about goldenrods. This is my main use for them now. I'll find a mound that I've made out of creosote bushes, custard grass, and then I'll just sort of cascade them from the top. I'll place one large one at the top, and then just bring it down to ground level. And I really like how it looks. It's something that's sort of one of my favorite techniques when it comes to using the goldenrods now. And now we're going around and using the medium-sized buffalo grass and align to surface and just sinking the grass down into the ground a little bit. This helps blend the bigger patches of grass that we've got down to a ground level. Obviously, where the path has been installed into the ground, there would be no space or anywhere for the grass to grow. So you'll probably find that closer to the edge of the path, it dies out. But we're obviously going to cover the terrain painting after this as well. This is quite a lengthy video. I really want to try and get in as many tips as I can. I want to make it as easy to follow through as humanly possible. This is going to be the first video that I add chapters in, so if you want to follow different portions, it should make it easy for you to do so. But let's not forget, it's not just going to be the rocks and foliage that help sell the look of this whole thing. The details are as well. So you can see I've made some lampposts in here as well. Again, the same thing as the foliage filters when you're creating your foliage palette. Don't be afraid to go through the construction tab and just have a look at what pieces there are. There's some really, really nice pieces that can help you sell the look that you're trying to go for, no matter what it is. It's such a diverse game, and even if the game doesn't have the theme and set that you originally want, I can assure you that there's going to be a way for you to be able to achieve the look that you want to achieve in this game. It's so diverse in that respect, and the pieces are really, really... They help you achieve whatever you want in this game. Those large Planet Zoo logs are pretty much one of my favourite items in the game. I'm pretty sure at this point it features in every single one of the pause habitats to date, and I am probably going to keep placing it in every single habitat to date, because it just, even though it takes up quite a lot of space, it's a feature, you know, like, especially if you've got a large open area with grass in it or desert, it helps break it up. You know, if you've got this green space, this big brown log in the middle of the habitat really helps you break up the colors, you know. And then we're just going to go around, and I've got this barrier here that I'm placing in, sinking it right down to the ground, just so that it helps break up the path from the foliage as well. Little details. Again, this might not be something that you like the look of, but some of you may like it. Again, it's all subjective. What I'm doing here isn't incorrect or correct. It's just completely subjective. You could even make your own custom fence as well, because that's how Planet Zoo works. It's something that's entirely plausible and possible within the game. When you're trying to set ambience in this game as well, really do not sleep on the VFX pieces and the speakers that are in the game. This is something that even console players are going to be able to utilize. Even if they can't place custom sounds within the game, there are inbuilt sounds that they can use that will really help you sell the vibe of what you're going for. You need to remember that a vibe and a experience is more than just what's available at a visual level. It also comes from what you're hearing and what you're smelling as well. When you go to the beach, the sound of seagulls, the smell of the ocean, all of those things combined with what you see is what helps make the experience. And I'm just doing some of the water foliage here. Usually this will consist of the same foliage from me, so you're looking at things like the cattail reeds, these bushy reeds, I can't remember what they're called off the top of my head, and then things like periwinkle leaves on the surface to act as like a pond scum, and then probably like a lily pad or two as well. And that generally tends to be what I go for water foliage. Nothing too special. Obviously, if you're making beaver habitat, you can place loads of logs in there to act like a beaver dam. But I try and keep this sort of to a minimum, really, because you don't want to overwhelm the water with too much foliage. And then this stick I just place in here as like a perch for things like, maybe like kingfishers or something like that. But with all that said and done, let's jump into the terrain painting. So terrain painting, this is something that I wasn't going to include, but again, I really wanted this to sort of like be a comprehensive tip video, really, more than anything else. And just like when you're doing your terrain manipulation at the very start of this whole process, keep these percentages low. Keep them down at 30%, 20%, and keep the size small as well. And this is pretty much going to be the same premise as well in terms of when you're doing your elevations. Just clicking. Lots of spam clicking. And my general process is that the edge of the pathways will be a combination of the light soil, dark soil, and then I'll scatter some sand in there as well. Obviously, the edge of the water here is going to be mainly sand, both types of sand, the soft and the coarse sand. And in the bulk foliage in the middle where you've got the buffalo grass is going to be the short green grass. These areas where you've obviously got the rocks and stuff like that, I tend to place... It depends. So where I've got the large patch of rocks there, I've used the rock terrain paint. But where there's only a little bit of rock and there might just be one rock sticking out the ground, I'll use the normal soil. But that is going to be it for this video. I'm just going to take a little stroll through here and you can get a grasp of everything and have a little look for yourselves. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to drop them down in the comment section below, and I'll try and cover them in future videos if needed. If not, I might be kickstarting my Discord again, where you can go and ask me questions over there. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Peace out, and I love you all.